In a way, you have to have known people to understand why their actions are so puzzling. My brother and older daughter and I all knew my mother. Not one of us can understand why she would run off with a man she wasn't married to, let alone a man who was married to someone else. And my brother is puzzling over something I have also puzzled over, and that is the protectiveness towards her of her big brother. Who, by the way, apologies to my cousin, I'm not sure what for, had a very large house with a great many bedrooms and could have offered her sanctuary. He could certainly have offered his sister sanctuary before her children came along, as far as I can tell. Except that I don't know where he was at the time that my mother became entangled with and entrapped by my father, which is how I see it. Neither one of us can understand why our Uncle Dick did not step in as the chaperone, as the protective brother. What on earth he was thinking when he socialized with my father. And all I can think, actually, is, apologies again to my cousins, my Uncle Dick had been married to a woman who was unfaithful to him, and no doubt would have swallowed my father's story that his wife had also been unfaithful, something he could so easily have proved with a mere simple blood test if it were true. And what my father told me was that he had been unable to find his wife in order to divorce her. I assume that is also what he told my mother and her brother. Of course, in point of fact, she did not move, as I've said so many times, from 88 6th Cross Road, Twickenham, between 1932 and 2007. It's therefore a little hard to believe that he couldn't find her in the late 1940s, mid to late 1940s. All he had to do was go and knock on the door of the marital home. However, my father was a very convincing man, and I didn't believe his tale, but I had had the misfortune to be closer to my father than most children. It did include a kind of almost telepathic intimacy. I knew when he was lying. And when he took me for a drive in 1978, after I'd confronted my parents with their non-married status, and by the way, he punched me down the stairs for that the night before going for the drive, so I guess I wouldn't have been in a mood alone with him in a car to press too hard as to the questions I asked him. I was punched from the top stair to the bottom stair, and had a few marks to show for that. So on this drive, My questions were pretty gentle. Were the children of the marriage, he had been named as the father of his wife's child, but he couldn't have been the father, he said. Why had he not divorced her? Exactly what I've just said. He couldn't find her to divorce her. He told me he had only found out in the last couple of years that she had eventually divorced him for desertion. In fact, I've seen the decree absolute, and there's no mention of desertion or any reason whatsoever that I recall. She divorced him in 1952. I think I said 56 on another video because that was what he initially told me, and we do tend to remember the first story we hear. 1952 was 2 years before I was born. I did not believe what he was telling me. I always knew when he was lying. Always. But I think it's possible that my uncle would have believed him. He only had to say the circumstances were the same. Unfaithful wife, and immediately there's a bond, isn't there? Kind of leaves the question of why my mother didn't tell her brother the truth, except that she probably believed the same story. Which could be why she went ballistic when she got her letter in 1973, letters in 1971, from a woman he had married in 1961. The other thing I wonder, of course, and have wondered for a very long time, is why my father picked the alias of Dick, which just happened to be my mother's brother's name, and her grandfather's, and Richard had run down through her family. And although he finally took permanently the name Dick on the 12th of the 12th, 45, exactly 6 years after his the photograph he had taken in, I think it was Rennes, in France. Exactly 6 years after that, he did finally, completely, utterly take the name Dick. However, he had signed letters occasionally in the name of Dick. From the earliest I can find is February 1944. I thought that precluded his having chosen the name because it was that of my mother's brother and would kind of possibly endear him to her. However, if the truth is that they met in London, in the same area where he met and married Enid, somewhere between 1940 and 1943, he could very easily have, he would have known her brother's name. She would most certainly have mentioned her brother. So, a kind of a long aside, which may not be of any interest to anyone but me and my brother, and actually primarily to my brother and I.